brings us to a day when we commemorate a particular monk. He was an abbot on Sinai. He was asked to write a book, and we've named him after it ever since. That's why we call him St. John of the Ladder. So he wrote this book called The Ladder of Divine Ascent, which is a very lofty title. It takes the imagery from the Old Testament where Jacob is driving, seeing this ladder, a ladder that connects earth to heaven. How is it that we may follow him? And St. John was asked, of course then he was Abba John, because he was the abbot of the monastery. Sorry, they called him Father John or Abba John. But as we can tell from history, he did accept, and he wrote this book. In this book there's like one or two lines that are addressed for lay people. This is a book that is for monks, by monks. And so it's one of those books where it's beautiful to read, but the immediate application into our own life, well, it takes a bit of application. Very few monks, for example, have someone waking them up at 2 a.m. saying, "I'm hungry," in whichever language they may speak. And so many other differences. That's all okay. Each of us have our own context, and a life in a monastery in the 600s or 700s is, of course, going to be quite different to the domestic, the life in family that I think most of us here find ourselves. What this book teaches us, though, is that there is a way, that we're not restricted to the ground floor, that God isn't finished with us. We have more to go. We have more to grow in His image and likeness. So what then shall we look to? We know this ladder of divine ascent exists, and we know that this ladder is designed for monastics, applicable for everyone. But it has its intent. What then for us? What would our ladder look like? Or if we're wanting to, perhaps our step ladder look like? Let's start with 3 steps. 3 steps that I think will give exponential results if we but focus on those few things. First of these, self-control. This happens in a number of different ways where we are able to exercise our self-control, and sometimes we do, and sometimes not so much. Sometimes we have growth opportunities. This self-control works in so many ways. In Great Lent, we're probably going to be focusing on food, maybe drink. And it's true, it is in that way. It is in our consumption. So we instead show self-control. This much is good, but not this much. We can satisfy ourselves with a plate, then we ought to do so, rather than taking on the full spread on the table. Even if it's vegan. Even if it's quote-unquote fasting food. Our self-control is vital. Our self-control is what is the platform on which we wage any other move in the spiritual life. With our self-control, we choose to pray. We choose that, okay, it's 7 o'clock, it's time for morning prayers, or it's time for evening prayers, depending on the time of the day. We are able to make that choice. Or perhaps we have the self-control to say, no, I don't have that much self-control, but I can after dinner. After rising from dinner, that's when prayers happen. because that's when it needs to happen. About working it for yourself. To know who you are and to keep that progressing towards heaven. That self-control works in many other ways as well. There's a psalm that we sing just the 2 verses of every Vespers service. The rubrics say to sing all of it, but sometimes we don't. When we pray, let our prayer arise as incense and the lifting up of our hands as a sacrifice. What are the next lines? To set a watch over our mouth and a door around our lips. That we control our tongue is among the harder challenges that we have. We're being really honest. It's fine when we're not trying to control our tongue. We may not even realize there's an issue. But if we're trying to have that self-control, to not say those words, to not say that sentence, either way it can go. That self-control is what we're in need of. To choose the right things to say. Not just the first thing that we blurt out that barely even makes it into our head. But to say the right things, to make the responses rather than simple instinctive reactions. So, self-control. The second, to embrace discomfort. It's a particularly difficult one. I suppose each of them have their own difficulties now that I think about it. But it feels like an especially difficult one. On the whole, I think most of us would agree that we would prefer comfort to discomfort. Given the option, we'd prefer a mattress over the ground. I think that's a universal thing. Yet this embrace of discomfort helps keep our passions in check, helps direct ourselves. Not only because, well, others have it worse. That's true. It's not a competition, but that's true. It reminds us, makes it true for us, that there are hardships between us and heaven. Some of them we choose, because ultimately this cost is so much greater than that cost in the long term. We do this with fasting. We embrace some temporary discomfort when we really, really, really want whatever it is you're thinking of right now. And instead, we choose something else. This is the embrace of discomfort. Where not everything is 100% what we want now. But instead, maybe we have to wait for it. Or maybe it's 80% of what we wanted. This embrace of discomfort in our own life, by our own choices, is something that ultimately is beneficial for us. It prepares us for what may be. That doesn't mean that we say, well, you should embrace discomfort. Please don't misinterpret this. But in our own lives, we're going to get enough thrown at us. We don't need anyone's help with this. But we embrace it in our own life. That's task enough. Third after self-control and the embrace of discomfort, the third I'm going to call selflessness. To minimize the things that we are wanting. have our wants, and this is very, I suppose, standard. We have our wants, our wishes, and this can be for things. This could be for extravagance and finery, or it could be for very, very normal things. Maybe it's we wanted 10 candles and there's only 5 left. It can be that we're wanting what should be noble things, but as ends in themselves, that's a corruption. It could be that we're wanting more money. It could also be that we're wanting more respect or honor or status. Each of these are wants. Each of these will cause us problems. Sometimes when we get it, but usually when we don't. When we're denied our wants. And we circumvent this. We nip it in the bud by not having those wants to begin with. Now in theory that sounds great. To have less wants, the first thought we may have is just have none, and that sounds great. Let's go with something more doable though. To not have the wants that don't even serve us anyway. If we have an expectation, for example, that all of the drivers on the road will be flawless, they won't cut us off, they will actually use their indicator. This is not a helpful expectation for you to have. I've said this to some of you before. You know how bad the average driver is, and half of them are worse. You should be expecting that things are going to be worse. We should be expecting this. And so this changes our expectations. We don't go from our expectations that have fallen short into anger because we haven't had an expectation and that's the general response. We instead have expected little and have driven appropriately. Anger is not our response. Dealing with reality becomes our response. I've just chosen one example. We can think of many others. The expectation that everyone will be good and perfect. The expectation that you're allowed your flaws, but the other person maybe not. The other person should be on their game. It's a flawed expectation. And sometimes we realize that we have these flawed expectations only after the fact. That's okay. That's a learning opportunity. But nonetheless, something that we can learn from. Something that we can change for ourselves. These are steps along the journey. How is it that we go from here to heaven? The Ladder of Divine Ascent teaches us that it's possible. The lives of the saints teach us that it's possible. If they did it, we can too. The how-to of this is on us. How am I going to go from where I am to who I was made to be? That becomes our life story. Our life's mission is to return to our fatherland in heaven. With these steps, we grow closer, much closer. With these steps, put these into practice. Self-control, the endurance of sufferings as it occurs, of discomfort, I should say, and the selflessness of letting go of those expectations, at least the ones that aren't serving us. John's prayers. May we draw closer and closer to the Lord that He